MSW Media.
SpyTalk, a podcast at the intersection of intelligence, foreign policy, national security, and military operations.
Hi there, I'm Jeff Stein, and this is SpyTalk. Just when you thought it couldn't get any crazier, it has. Not to beat an old and now tattered drum, but events in our corner of the national security world continue on their Alice in Wonderland hallucinogenic path. There was Signalgate, the weird, apparently inadvertent invitation to the editor-in-chief of the Atlantic magazine into an online discussion of battle plans for Yemen by the Trump administration's top defense and intelligence officials. Even more disturbing, the officials responsible for protecting the nation's secrets, Attorney General Pam Bondi and FBI Director Kash Patel, said there's nothing to see here, move along. The Russians and Chinese almost certainly listening and had to be laughing up their sleeves. One of the officials in on that chat, Joe Kent, hadn't even been confirmed yet by the Senate to take up his position as head of the National Counterterrorism Center. And Kent, don't get me started, turned out to be a far-right extremist who pals around with white supremacists. Meanwhile, the purge and resignations of career intelligence officials at the National Security Council, the CIA, and the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, the Russia-friendly Tulsi Gabbard, continued, driven by no less than Laura Loomer, a conspiracy-mongering social media influencer whom Trump has embraced like a modern-day Rasputin. And there's so much more, including Trump's continued disturbing romance of Vladimir Putin. To discuss all these wacky developments, my guest today is Tim Weiner, the Pulitzer Prize-winning author of several books on U.S. intelligence, including his latest, The Mission, the CIA in the 21st Century, scheduled for publication this July. Tim Weiner, welcome back to Spy Talk. We meet amid the chaos in Washington of on-again, off-again tariffs, war, all of which has to affect the standing of the United States in the world and thus national security. And national security is our beat, specifically intelligence. It's been often said that partisan politics are the poison that infects intelligence operations. The Trump people, MAGA world, has long insisted that there's a deep state at work that's infecting politics. But here we have sort of a new deep state being formed. The latest news out of the ODNI and Tulsi Gabbard's realm is that they've got a new team in there rooting out woke people and so on and so forth. Give us the big picture, Tim. You've been writing about this stuff for some 40 plus years. What do you see going on here?
Well, hi, Jeff, and thanks for connecting me with the Spy Talk world. We're now 11 weeks into the new world of Trump Unbound, and let's take stock. The global order that the United States created beginning 80 years ago after World War II is cooked, crushed, crumbling into chaos. The alliances that the United States has forged in those 8 decades since the Second World War are broken. The structure of American national security, its traditions, its rules, is under attack. The question that we ink-stained wretches who cover intelligence have been grappling with for the better part of a decade, the question being, what accounts for Trump's strange bromance with Vladimir Putin? A vexatious question. Is he an asset of the Russian Federation? Is he a useful idiot? Is he an agent of influence? That is, since there are no pictures of Trump taking a satchel full of Kremlin gold under a bridge in Vienna at midnight, was he somehow recruited by Putin, perhaps on his first trip to Moscow in 1987. That's now not the question. The question has been answered. Trump is not an agent of Russia. He is Russia's ally. And proof of that came back in February when he voted with Russia and North Korea and other members of the axis of authoritarianism against a resolution condemning Russia for the invasion and occupation of Ukraine. Trump has arrayed a collection of crackpots and fools on top of the national security agencies of this country. We have the Christo-fascist Pete Hegseth at the Pentagon firing generals for being woke or being women, and ominously firing all the JAGs, the Judge Advocates General, who are there to determine whether a president has given a lawful order to the troops. He has replaced them with his personal attorney. Over at the Directorate of National Intelligence, we have the Putin apologist and conspiracy theorist, Tulsi Gabbard, who I venture to say knows as much about what her job requires as I know about theoretical astrophysics, just to say precious little. Gabbard is now also on a campaign to cut the throats of those deemed woke. She has selected a gentleman named Joe Kent for a top post. Kent is, yes, a former CIA officer, but also a failed candidate for Congress who ran on the most red meat MAGA platform you can possibly imagine, and apparently has the word Panzer tattooed on his upper body, this courtesy of David Corn and Mother Jones. Over at the FBI, we have the MAGA warrior Kash Patel, who has vowed to essentially, if not disestablish, decapitate the National Security and Intelligence divisions of the Bureau. And at CIA, we have the MAGA acolyte John Radcliffe, who has not distinguished himself in his first weeks in office. And I think we should do a deep dive on Mr. Radcliffe's record and what he has wrought at CIA. The total picture is of a national security establishment that has been taken over by people who do not believe in the national security of the United States as you and I understand it, but see these agencies, CIA, FBI, as capitals of the deep state, and will do anything Trump asks of them to purge their ranks of the ideologically suspect, and in particular those who have spent the last years of their careers trying to oppose Russia and support Ukraine. It is not a comforting picture, Jeff.
You summed it up brilliantly. I'd like to put a little flesh on it for listeners who don't closely follow the ins and outs of politics in Washington and so on. And I must say, in one way, we can look at this whole debate over Trump and Russia and MAGA and this and that. It's sort of a high-stakes parlor game in Washington that doesn't affect people's lives. But let's go back to the origin of modern U.S. intelligence. It was formed in order that we would not have another Pearl Harbor.
That's right. Fighting the Cold War came later.
So the question is whether this chaos at the top of U.S. intelligence will affect our preparation for another attack by terrorists. We can debate whether ISIS and Al Qaeda, etc., have the capability to attack the United States like it did on 9/11. We can have a more serious debate whether China may make its move on Taiwan now, looking at the chaos in America. We have to debate whether Russia may see it advantageous, despite its debilitated position because of the grind of the Ukraine war, make more aggressive moves on Western Europe. The question, it seems to me now, given this poison that has infected the top ranks of the intelligence agencies, not only whether we are prepared to detect an impending attack, but whether we would encourage one. We, meaning the Trump administration. I mean, when we look at this odd relationship that Trump has, subservient, I might say, relationship that Trump has with Vladimir Putin, and his desire constantly to make deals with people he thinks they're advantageous to him, but have not turned out well in his corporate life, with so many bankruptcies and criminal behavior and so on. We have to really consider at this point whether the president of the United States is a subversive.
Well, Trump has gone over to the other side. He has joined the authoritarian axis. He has aligned himself with Russia and against Ukraine. The threats to the United States, the greatest threats, are not migration, as Tulsi Gabbard and John Radcliffe posited in their worldwide threat assessment a few days ago. They are Russia and China, and the intelligence services of Russia and China. Now, the Russians and the Chinese take different approaches when they regard the United States through the lens of their very different intelligence services. The Chinese want to know us. Xi said some years ago, data is the new oil. And for the past dozen years, the Chinese have achieved information dominance through espionage. They have ransacked the personnel files of the government, including present and serving CIA officers, through an attack on the Office of Personnel Management. They have penetrated all 9 major telecoms to the point where they were reading at least the metadata on foreign intelligence surveillance courts' authorizations against Chinese targets. They were listening to Trump talk on his phones in the weeks before the election. And all this is, I believe, part of a long campaign to essentially create a surveillance state in the United States akin to what the Chinese have created in China, where there are 500 million closed-circuit TV cameras monitoring people, license plate readers, biometric data files. They want to project that surveillance state into the U.S. so that at a time of war and crisis, they have mapped the battlefield, and the battlefield is us. So the Chinese want to know us. The Russians just want to screw us. And that is the fundamental difference in their approaches. Putin and his predecessors regarded the Russian intelligence services less as instruments of careful, patient espionage and more as blunt instruments of sabotage and subversion. And if you follow what the Russians have been doing in Europe, which includes sabotage, subversion, arson, and other terms of what people are now calling gray zone warfare, it is not a pretty picture. The end game in Ukraine, if we are approaching an end game, matters a great deal. The CIA, which I have written about off and on for 4 decades, has been absolutely essential to the survival of Ukraine since 2014 through intelligence support primarily. if Putin is allowed to keep the land he has stolen from Ukraine and presently occupied, that will simply be a prelude to the next Russian invasion in Europe and perhaps, although not through military means, of the United States. Let's remember these are the people who attacked our democracy in 2016 to help ensure the election of Donald Trump in the first place. Well, now their ally runs, or is attempting to run the country, and they are gleeful. The world is going their way, Jeff.
Yeah, this is quite an extraordinary development for the most powerful nation in the world, having the most powerful military in the world, and it seems to be being thrown away under the guise of some, eradication of woke and political correctness and so on. Speaking of which, let's drill down for a moment specifically into what's going on at CIA. News emerged a couple of weeks ago that John Atkinson, the chief of the CIA, had recruited a veteran, very experienced former CIA operations officer to come out of retirement, Ralph Goff, and to take over the clandestine service, which runs espionage and covert action activities against our enemies. And then we learned that his recruitment had been squashed, not by CIA. In fact, what we've learned is that the rank and file at CIA, senior operations officials, really wanted an experienced hand running clandestine service, but that the White House stepped in and squashed the recruitment of this very fine, experienced former senior officer. And now they're looking at MAGA types. I'm not going to mention a particular name, but the one name that had been considered before is back in play. And we'll see what happens with that. But when you start politicizing to such a degree, the very arm of the intelligence agency, this tip of the spear, as we like to say, in terms of detecting what's really going on in Russia and China, North Korea, Iran, and so on, we're really into some deep waters here.
Well, let's examine why Ralph Goff was sandbagged by the White House. It seems pretty clear. Goff had spent some of the last years of his career at CIA working to oppose Russia and support Ukraine. And in retirement, in recent weeks, he has been vocal in various media about the necessity of supporting Ukraine and working to try to ensure the survival of its democracy in the face of a brutal attack by an authoritarian regime. I am 100% sure that that's why someone at the White House, or someone who got to Trump, and I have a few suspects in mind, got him to put the kibosh on Goff. Now, let's review what John Ratcliffe has actually done since he became CIA director on January 23rd. Following the demands of Trump and Elon Musk, he got rid of everybody the CIA had hired in 2023 and 2024. These are people who, in the clandestine service, had gone through training at the farm. These are analysts who had come on board, particularly analysts who'd been hired hand over fist by Bill Burns, the director of CIA under Biden, to staff up the China Mission Center and go after China. And Radcliffe sent all their names in an unclassified email through the White House to Musk and his tech bros at Doge. It is highly likely that that unclassified email was accessible to Chinese intelligence. Then,
no question.
Then he has encouraged people with 20 years or more of experience to find other employment. And he has made it clear that if people are not on board with the MAGA view of the world, they should look for other jobs. By getting rid of hundreds upon hundreds of new hires, Radcliffe has essentially mortgaged the future of CIA by encouraging the most experienced officers and analysts to retire. He is selling out for a pittance thousands of years of experience and expertise. And he has brought in a wily and devious lawyer named Michael Ellis, who briefly served during 2020 as one of Trump's moles in the national security establishment. He was appointed to be chief counsel at the National Security Agency, and the DERNSA, the director of the NSA, General Nakasone, said, I ain't having this guy. Keep him away from me. So you got Radcliffe on top. You've got Ellis, who is a MAGA warrior, as the deputy director of CIA. And if you get another MAGA mouthpiece to run the clandestine service, you're in for a world of pain, my friend.
You're essentially giving away the store to the Russians and the Chinese. And, we hardly need to go back over, but we'll just briefly mention that, or bring up again, so-called Signal Gate, where top national security officials, the head of the National Security Council, Tom Hegseth, Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, and so on and so forth, they were all talking on this app, which is easily penetrated by sophisticated opposition and intelligence services. They were talking about war plans and strike plans in Yemen. So these guys, put aside their politics for a moment, their security hygiene is so poor that they're giving away the store to the opposition to start with. Now, we have to touch also on this bizarre meeting at the White House last week, in which this so-called right-wing influencer, a MAGA extreme, so extreme that other MAGA people stay away from her, Laura Loomer, who says 911 was an inside job, and many other bizarre conspiracy notions. She was invited to the White House for an Oval Office meeting with the President of the United States, in which she demanded, essentially, the expulsion of several professional members of the National Security Council and the head of the National Security Agency and its deputy, because of her bizarre notions of being woke. And Trump acted on this. I mean, we are living in a nightmare world with these people. And it's very, very hard to get our heads around the idea that the President of the United States and his cronies would deliberately destroy the national security apparatus of the United States, the thing that keeps us safe. But here we are. So are they deliberately destroying, or we've got a mad king? I mean, it's hard to distinguish between the two.
Well,
but it doesn't really matter, does it?
Jeff, I have found over the years in covering national security and intelligence that you should, and this is a good life lesson in general, that you should never attribute to conspiracy what you can reliably chalk up to stupidity. Stupidity is a more powerful force in the course of human events. Conspiracy is hard. It comes from the Latin conspire, to breathe together. So it's the stupid that is in charge right now, and is in the saddle and riding us. Other people, who think about and write about national security and intelligence have raised the question, if a hostile power were occupying the United States, what would look different? You've got people who don't know which way is up in charge of the military, the intelligence services. You've got how can I put this politely, Jeff? An empty suit as Secretary of Defense. The CIA does not operate in a vacuum. It operates in harmony when things are working well with the diplomatic corps and with military officers to achieve the foreign policy goals of the United States. One thing that people tend to misunderstand about CIA is that it is not, with the rarest exceptions, a rogue elephant. Okay? The CIA is an instrument of American foreign policy, and it operates and is exquisitely sensitive to the command of the commander-in-chief. So zoom back a minute. What is the foreign policy of the United States today in April of 2025? It is, to put it in the politest terms, utterly incoherent and ultimately self-destructive. Now, we were talking about threats, which are many and varied. What would happen? Imagine if the United States were attacked at home or overseas with this crew of incompetent and incapable people in charge of our national security. What would Trump do if we were attacked in any way, shape, or form? Well, you don't have to be a novelist, which I am decidedly not, to imagine that he would declare martial law or cancel elections. And who would stop him? Congress? The courts? I think not. And what would stop him, for example, if he ordered the clandestine service of the CIA to subvert the government of Denmark in order to grab Greenland, or to subvert the government of Panama, instigate a coup perhaps, to enable him to grab the Panama Canal, wrest it back, treaties be damned. Only CIA officers with the greatest morality would be able to do that. And having just spent 3 years writing a book about the history of the CIA in the 21st century, and having heard some riveting stories about what went on 5, 10, 15, and 20 years ago, were CIA officers to oppose dangerous, illegal, or simply cockamamie concepts of covert action, they might win, but it would be years before their stories would be told.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All these officials, professionals, lifelong professionals, are really facing or are about to face dilemmas in terms of their careers, whether to object to policies that they see as backward, self-defeating, hurtful to the security of the United States, at risk of their careers.
The CIA does not have a deep history of saying no to presidents.
No, it doesn't.
When Richard Helms said no to President Nixon's demand that he help cover up the Watergate break-in, he was fired as the director of Central Intelligence. Parenthetically, Nixon said, well, would you like to be ambassador to Moscow? And Helms allowed, as that might be a bad idea. And Nixon said, what about Iran? So off Helms went to Tehran.
It's a pretty good imitation.
If you'd listened to as much Nixon tape as I have, you would be able to do that too.
Well, there's also there's a long history of people objecting inside CIA. There was dissidents on Vietnam. There were dissidents on the torture programs, the black sites, and so on, and they didn't get very far. And bad policies continued. So, in other words, the bottom line is that unfortunately we can expect the intelligence and military leaders, especially the people that Trump has installed in these agencies, to go along with even the most egregiously criminal policies. Boy, we're going to leave it on that happy note. But we don't have anything positive to say.
Well,
we hope we will soon.
Here, I cannot let you go without putting in a brief plug for a book that I'm still writing the epilogue to it, but it will be published in July. It's called The Mission, the CIA in the 21st Century. It's all on the record. There are some ripping good yarns in it.
I've been reading it, Tim, and it is a great read. And deeply disturbing in some of these chapters of material I was familiar with, but you added new details, such as the shoot down of a missionary plane over Peru back in the 90s. And anyway, we'll come back to that when your book comes out. And right. This is some great stuff you're writing. As always, it's going to generate headlines and a lot of attention. So people will be lucky to have it.
Yeah. As a final word, everyone within the sound of your voice, Jeff, should be highly attuned to who becomes the next chief of the clandestine service of the CIA. The present occupant is someone I interviewed at length. His career is absolutely breathtaking. He's a stand-up guy, and he too has worked long and hard to push back on Russian imperialism and support democracy in Ukraine. If he gets replaced by a MAGA marionette, the United States is in for a world of pain.
We're following that very closely. I've had conversations over the last 36 hours and so on about various candidates. Names have been raised, and we'll report it as soon as it's in place.
That's good to know.
Tim Weiner, thanks so much for coming on the podcast again, and I'm sure we'll do it again after your book comes out, discussing any number of headline-making stories that are in your book, The Mission, and see you around.
God save the United States.
And that's it for this week's Spy Talk. Thanks again for listening. You can find lots more interesting conversations like this one in our archives, available at our home at the MSW Network or on Apple or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you haven't already, mosey on over to our Spy Talk newsletter on Substack, where my colleagues and I offer fresh reporting and analyses from the intersection of intelligence, foreign policy, and military operations. Just Google Spy Talk and you'll find your way there. This week's Spy Talk podcast was smoothly produced, as always, by Kanai and expertly edited by Molly Hockey for MSW Media. That's it. I'm Jeff Stein. See you around.
For more original reporting and insights like this, subscribe to SpyTalk.co on Substack and follow us on Twitter at @talk_spy. If you enjoyed our podcast, subscribe and leave a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
MSW Media.